Good morning. Today, we're going to talk about how those lazy gentlemen caused all the problems at Jamestown. Or did they? Come on in, let's discuss it. Well, good morning and welcome back to another installment in our Going to the Source series. Today we are taking yet another look at Captain John Smith. Specifically, we're looking for some context for a certain amount of mythology that I think an awful lot of us learned growing up, that lazy gentlemen were a big part of the problem at Jamestown. Smith is the primary source for a lot of this misconception, and yet he himself does not actually, when we get into using these things in context, really make this claim. So let's go ahead and take a look. We've pulled a few different quotes from his various works here, and we'll start with this one here. He says, "No sooner were we landed," and this is pretty soon after the settling of the colony. This is more or less in their first few months here. So he says, "No sooner were we landed, but the president dispersed so many as were able, some for glass, others for tar, pitch, and soap ashes, leaving them with the fort to the council's oversight. But 30 of us he conducted down the river some 5 miles from Jamestown to learn to make clapboard, cut down trees, and lie in woods. Amongst the rest, he had chosen Gabriel Beadle and John Russell, the only 2 gallants of this last supply, and both proper gentlemen." Now, here's an important thing to note. He's saying he's only got 2 gentry with him on this particular project. And so far, he said they're both proper gentlemen. Now, this is an important distinction. He himself is a gentleman. He does not disapprove overall of gentlemen. And as we'll see later on, he doesn't like improper gentlemen. But here he's saying, no, these two are solid. "Strange were these pleasures to their conditions, yet lodging, eating and drinking, working or playing, they but doing as the president did himself. All these things were carried so pleasantly as within a week they became masters, making it their delight to hear the trees thunder as they fell. But the axes so oft blistered their tender fingers that many times every third blow had a loud oath to drown the echo. For remedy of which sin, the president devised how to have every man's oaths numbered, and at night for every oath to have a can of water poured down his sleeve, with which every offender was so washed, himself and all, that a man should scarce hear an oath in a week." Now, I like that one. That's a pretty humorous image, right? Here you've got, instead of a swear jar you have to drop money in, they're dumping a jar of water down your sleeve every time you swear. But it's important to note, why are these guys swearing so much that they've been so washed that it finally breaks their habit? Because they are indeed working. He's basically making this point. They're saying, yeah, okay, it's not work they're accustomed to, it's not work they're familiar with, but they're not shirking the responsibility. They're getting it done. They're blistering their tender fingers. Now, that's also interesting because, of course, as proper gentlemen, they're well acquainted with the handling of a sword, which is going to put different calluses on your hand than a felling axe. But here they are, even having blistered their hands, still working, and just cussing about it as they go. So clearly not being lazy, working through the blistering of their fingers. So no support there for this idea of idle and lazy gentlemen. Quite the opposite, in fact. Here we move on to our next selection, again from Captain John Smith. "By this let no man think that the president and these gentlemen spent their times as common wood haggers felling at trees, or such other like labors, or that they were pressed to it as hirelings or common slaves. For what they did, after they were but once a little inured, it seemed, and some conceited it only as a pleasure and recreation. Yet 30 or 40 of such voluntary gentlemen would do more in a day than 100 of the rest that must be pressed to it by compulsion. But 20 good workmen had been better than them all. And there's a margin note. And margin notes with these historical sources are always tricky. We don't have, most of the time anyway, of knowing 100% who added it, when it was added, these sorts of things. But the margin note says, one gentleman better than 20 lubbers. Lubber being, we've all heard the term in the pirate movies and that sort of thing, but lubber simply being a term for a big clumsy person, essentially. So what is this one saying? Basically saying, okay, these guys, again, they're willingly getting down to the work that they're being asked to do. They're not having to be forced to it. They're getting to it, and again, not necessarily something they're previously experienced with, previously skilled at, but as they're getting into it, these guys are effective. What they're saying here, effectively making a game of it. So managing to not only get the work done, but kind of have a little bit of fun doing it. And he's saying here very specifically 30 or 40 of such voluntary gentlemen, 30 or 40 guys who are voluntarily doing this, are doing more in a day than 100 of the people who were not willing. Now, does he say specifically who is having to be pressed to it? The quality of that person? No. But we got at least 30 or 40 gentry who are happily doing the work that needs to be done. Now, he then goes on to say 20 good workmen would have been better than all of them. And of course, that makes sense. Somebody who's actually experienced at it, already good at it, is going to do it more efficiently. But basically saying, lacking that skilled labor, the gentry are at least willing to put the effort in. They're having to force everybody else to do that same work. So again, we do not find support for the idea of the lazy gentry, and in fact, we find support for the exact opposite. The gentlemen are the ones that are actually getting the work done. So, moving on to our next Smith quote here. He says, "When you sinned again, I entreat you rather sinned, but 30 carpenters, husbandmen, gardeners, fishermen, blacksmiths, masons, and diggers up of trees roots, well provided, than 1,000 of such as we have. For except we be able to both lodge them and feed them, the most will consume with want of necessaries before they can be made good for anything. Thus, if you please to consider this account, and of the unnecessary wages to Captain Newport or his ship so long lingering and staying here, for notwithstanding his boasting to leave us victuals for 12 months, though we had 89 people by this discovery lame and sick, and but a pint of corn a day for a man, we were constrained to give him 3 hogsheads of that to victual him homeward. Or yet to send into Germany or Poland for glassmen and the rest, till we be able to sustain ourselves, and relive them when they come. Relieve them when they come. It were better to give £500 a ton for those gross commodities in Denmark, than send for them hither, till more necessary things be provided. For in overtoiling our weak and unskillful bodies to satisfy this desire of present profit, we can scarce ever recover ourselves from one supply to another, and I humbly entreat you hereafter, let us know what we should receive, and not stand to the sailors' courtesy to leave us what they please, else you may charge us with what you will, but we, not you, with anything. These are the causes that have kept us in Virginia from laying such a foundation, that ere this might have given much better content and satisfaction, but as yet you must not look for any profitable returns, and so I humbly rest." Now, that's a lot. There's a lot of mouthful. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that's not necessarily directly related to this. He's laying a lot of blame on Captain Newport and the sailors for a lot of the issues they're having, saying that these guys lingered too long in port and consumed a lot of their provisions, saying that Newport boasted that he dropped off a ton of food for these guys, and yet the colony already low on food, had to give Newport and his men food to get them back to England. So he's grousing about a lot of issues as he's seeing them. But he's saying here, again, asking for the skilled tradesmen that they're lacking. He wants carpenters, husbandmen, gardeners, fishermen, blacksmiths, masons, and diggers up of tree roots. Because, of course, they're trying to turn virgin forest, monstrous trees, into workable arable land. And he's basically saying if we had but 30 of these sorts of people, then it'd be better than 1,000 of such as we have. And basically he's saying it doesn't matter who we've got or how hard they're willing to work if they don't know how to do the work. And that's a reasonable complaint. It doesn't matter whether your people are willing if they're not good at it. And so he's asking for more skilled labor. But basically pointing out if we've got to train them on this end, we'll before we can make them good for anything, they'll have already eaten us out of house and home kind of thing. We need people who are productive from day one. So he is griping about the lack of certain skills. But again, not saying anywhere here that anything about this idea of lazy gentlemen. So we're just still not seeing it anywhere. Finally, we have our last selection for today. Besides Jamestown, that was strongly palisadoed, containing some 50 or 60 houses, he left 5 or 6 other several forts and plantations, though they were not so sumptuous as our successors expected. They were better than they provided any for us. All this time we had but 1 carpenter in the country and 3 others that could do little but desired to be learners. 2 blacksmiths, 2 sailors, and those we right laborers were for the most part footmen and such as they that were adventurers brought to attend them, or such as they could persuade to go with them, that never did know what a day's work was, except the Dutchmen and Poles and some dozen other. For all the rest were poor gentlemen, tradesmen, serving men, libertines, and such like 10 times more fit to spoil a commonwealth than either begin one or help to maintain one. For when neither the fear of God, nor the law, nor shame, nor displeasure of their friends could rule them here, there is small hope ever to bring 21 of them ever to be good there. Notwithstanding, I confess diverse amongst them had better minds, and grew much more industrious than was expected. Yet 10 good workmen would have done more substantial work in a day than 10 of them in a week. Therefore, men may rather wonder how we could do so much than use us so badly, because we did no more but leave those examples to make others beware, and the fruits of all we know not for whom. So, again, a little bit of a mouthful there. What are the important points here? He's basically pointing out that once again, they're lacking the bulk of the skilled trades that they really need to do most of this efficiently. Whether it's through the Virginia Company having not sent the right people to begin with, or attrition, having lost some of the skill sets they started with, or what have you, he's saying that we're lacking most of these. Except, and he's saying, those that are recorded as those we right laborers, those that are recorded as laborers, are not actually, in many cases, people out of the laboring classes, but they're people that the adventurers, the gentry that are coming here, have brought with them as their various hangers-on, their servants, their attendants, and very often those are going to be members of their own household, younger siblings or extended relations, or that sort of thing. So from a similar social level. He refers to poor gentlemen, and it is an imprecise term. Most of the time through his various writings, when he uses the term poor in reference to a person, he's trying to say pitiable, if you will. These poor people kind of thing. But he may mean that these are poor gentries and they're of the gentry classes, but they're not that firstborn son. They didn't inherit, and so they are cash poor. They're broke. He may be saying that these, as opposed to our first quote where he says they're proper gentlemen, that these are poor gentlemen, that these aren't good quality gentlemen. Or again, may just be saying, they're in a poor state. They're pitiable, if you will. And unfortunately, there isn't any further context there to specify. So again, less precise. We don't get as much from that as we might like. But again, he's saying here that 10 good workmen would have done more substantial work in a day than 10 of these people that we've got essentially in a week. So again, he's not saying people are lazy, I can't get them to work. I mean, he said that in one other, that some are having to be driven to it, forced to it. But he's got other people who are willing to work. What he's saying is the people I've got aren't good at the work, and I need more skilled labor. I need the right skilled labor. And that is a wildly different thing from blaming a whole social class of laziness. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of times this is colored by our modern perception of what the upper classes are, and that is colored by what they eventually evolved into. By the very end of the 1800s, the early 1900s, much of the societal function for the European upper classes is gone. And so they do start to be seen by much of the rest of the population as sort of superfluous upper class, ne'er-do-wells or what have you, just sort of useless socialites. This is the era in which the gentry nobility are still your warrior class. They are the primary employers. They're the governing class, the administrative class. These are the people that fight your wars for you. And an awful lot of the gentlemen that are coming here are combat veterans. So far from lazy, they've been on the front lines already. And that's something that he says here, they're 10 times more fit to spoil a commonwealth and either begin one or help maintain one. That very likely referring to the fact that these guys are good campaigners. They're good for going and wrecking up somebody's country and taking their resources. But to try to build your own and produce your own resources, that's not their skill set. That's not their prior experience. So, again, all the way through, we just don't see any support for this concept of lazy gentlemen. We see several instances where he's saying, yeah, they're not as good at it as I would like, but at least they're willing to work. They'll do what I ask them to. And I think a portion of that is again, many of the gentlemen coming here, not necessarily all of them, but many of the gentlemen coming here have, to a greater or lesser extent, a military background, experience. Some of them are combat veterans, what have you. Smith himself is a career officer, a combat veteran. So it makes a certain amount of sense that he is able to work better, more efficiently, closer with other military career-minded men like himself. But again, we just don't see this support anywhere for this idea of a lazy gentleman. And it's a modern ideal that has been applied inaccurately onto this historical context. And just to give you another idea, in word searching through some of these sources, we say in Smith's The General History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles, Volume 1, the word lazy is used one time and not in conjunction with gentlemen whatsoever. In Smith's The True Travels, Adventures, and Observations of Captain John Smith into Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, he uses the word lazy 0 times. And in Smith's A True Relation of Such Occurrences and Accidents of Note as Hath Happened in Virginia Since the First Planting of that Colony, he uses lazy 0 times. He's just not referring to it. He talks about gentry plenty, and mostly he's talking about the soldiers he's serving alongside. So, there are other passages where he kind of grouses about people that he sees as counterfeits, as they've represented themselves as gentry but aren't. They don't have the skill, they don't have the education, they don't have the background, they can't function as gentry, and they don't have the willingness to contribute the way the other gentry do. So he basically, what he says in some of these passages that we didn't include verbatim is he doesn't like posers. Well, who does, right? But these guys, in our first quote, as he says, proper gentlemen, men who are of the upper classes, who know what is expected of them in their social class. They're here to contribute. They're here to get the work done. They're here to see this thing through and try to make it as successful as possible. Do they always have the skills to do it efficiently? No. We can't all be good at everything. And so multiple times, again, he does say, man, I really wish I had more skilled tradesmen that are good at this specifically. But nowhere does he ever accuse the proper gentry of being lazy. So there we have it. I hope you found this illuminating. It's certainly a topic that we end up addressing here on site quite frequently, because again, it is a common misconception. If this raises for you any questions, if there's more you'd like to know about, leave them in comments below for us. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time.